Good evening and welcome to Vanguard, Conversations with Women of Color in STEM, or Vanguard STEM for short. I'm your host, Dr. Jadida Eisler, and I am an NSF Astronomy and Astrophysics postdoctoral fellow at Vanderbilt University, and also the creator and host of Vanguard STEM. I am super excited. This is the season 3 premiere of the show. Y'all, we made it to 3 seasons. Won't he do it? I just can't even. And I have an incredible panel for you today. We are going to get into some really actually pretty intense stuff, but if there's anyone that I'd want to journey into a lot of the discussion that we're about to have, it would be our two guests, Dr. Danielle Lee and Sharif Jackson, who I'm going to formally introduce in just a second. But they are here and we are so excited. So before we get into that, let me tell you what Vanguard STEM is. It's a live monthly show, which you are now watching, focused on and highlighting women of color extend their experiences, trying to build conversation and relationship between emerging and established women of color in STEM. So that's our main goal. Our season 3 premiere means that we've done this 2 seasons before. We've covered a range of topics, and we're very excited to go into a whole new season of information and sharing and all kinds of topics that you've told us are interesting to you. So our premiere actually relates a lot to our finale from season 2 on a topic that we call BBB in STEM. That's been our hashtag, and that's Burnout, Bravery, and Being a Woman of Color in STEM. And that conversation started because we wanted to talk about how tough the work is, and it's difficult to do STEM just period, because these are challenging enterprises, but it's also difficult when you add the additional burden of, it's not a burden, you add the additional facet of being a woman of color in STEM or having an intersectional identity. So we got a lot of feedback from you that you really, that whole process and that whole conversation resonated with you, and so we kept talking about it, we've been writing about it on the site. And then actually, very tragically, there were the 2 extrajudicial killings of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling happening basically within 24 hours that really rocked many communities, certainly the Vanguard STEM communities, absolutely the Black and STEM community, many communities of color. And we were all trying to reckon with what this means, what these instances mean, and what we realized was that there was a certain amount of racial trauma burnout that we were experiencing. And when we want to talk about it, so that's what we've extended this conversation. And so that's going to be our main topic tonight, is we're going to dive into racial trauma and how that impacts burnout and how that interfaces with us being STEM practitioners in all our different ways. So that's where our 2 esteemed panelists come into play. They're going to be engaging with us on this topic and helping us really expand it. Before we get to them, I swear there are guests. You can see them. They're right there. So I'm not even lying that I have people for you. But before we get there, let me do just 2 minutes of housekeeping. So number 1, it's a live show. We do that on purpose. We really want you to engage. We want you to ask questions. We want you to tweet at us, hit us up on Facebook, all of the places, all of the ways. We really want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. We want you to show up, tell us what you're thinking. And when they say something that resonates with you, let us know. The 2 main ways actually 3 main ways that you can ask questions are Twitter. That's our number 1 place to go. Use the hashtags BBB in STEM or Black in STEM, because this is a Black in STEM collabo. Or you can go to Google and go into the actual Hangout box and type in a question there. We'll see that as well. And we also have some of our interns over on Facebook. So those are the 3 ways that you can engage with us, ask questions, and have your voice heard in this conversation. So without further ado, please let me introduce our esteemed panelists. I'll start with Mr. Sharif Jackson, who has graciously agreed to be on our panel and talk to us about his perspective on all the things that are happening in terms of police brutality and a lot of the racial trauma that we're going through in the world. Sharif has been obsessed with technology since he was a kid. He is an avid podcaster and producer of incredible science STEM content. And also he's into gaming, and so he does a lot with the gaming community. So if you've seen or heard of Science Looks Good or Gaming Looks Good, you can thank Sharif Jackson for that. He has a master's in engineering management and works in business intelligence systems and data analysis. Welcome, Sharif.
Thank you, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm pretty humbled, so I appreciate it.
We are glad to have you on your team. You're our first Man Crush Monday in STEM, so we think pretty highly of you, bud.
I know. I'm very happy. My cheeks are turning rosy because black people do blush. I mean,
That's
we do
true.
blush. So
True.
it's happening.
Facts only. Facts only. Listen, we're already spitting knowledge. You hear that? And our also equally esteemed panelist is Dr. Danielle Lee, who's an incredible champion she's been such a supporter of Vanguard STEM and Black in STEM, but also is in her own right an incredible ecologist, an evolutionary biologist who's really interested in the behavior of animals. She's a TED Fellow and an Ebony Power 100 awardee. She is all the things, and we are so happy to have her here. So thank you so much for being here, Danielle. Wait. We can't hear you. You're muted. Let's fix that. There you go.
All right. Thank you. I'm so happy. I've been watching this show and seeing how it evolved, and I'm just honored to finally be a part of it. This is so exciting. Thank you.
Hooray! I know. It's going to be so much fun. Okay, so before we jump into our topic, which is quite weighty and heavy, I wanted to ask you both about your science, right? You both do STEM, in some way. And so I wanted to ask you, to give us like a brief synopsis of the kind of work you do, and then let us know, how you got interested in that. And then maybe close with maybe one tip that you'd have for someone that finds what you do interesting that might want to get into it, like a first step for someone else. So why don't we start off with Danielle?
Oh, okay. So I'm a biologist. I study rodents, so I'm a mammologist. I study animal behavior. I look at their individual behavior, and I'm now looking at their behavior across urban gradients. So I actually study rodents that live in different types of habitats. I work both in Africa, so I study African giant pouch rats, this amazing bomb-sniffing rat. And I also study rodents here domestically. I have to do something while I'm here at home. And I'm looking at just their individual differences because we want to understand how animals not only, make a living in the world, but also how they're responding to increasing urbanization in the world. So that's what I do. If you're interested in it, one of the things I really like to encourage young people to recognize is that although I got into it because I love those Wild Kingdom shows. That's how I got into it. And I spent a lot of time outside. So I was very fortunate. I had a family that loved PBS, and they also liked being outside. So they really, really encouraged those things. And it was a dream come true being able to, finally visit South America and Africa and do this, Wild Kingdom type work. But you don't have to hop on a plane and go on big expeditions with tons of luggage, although that is exactly what I do. To get started, you can start in your backyard. So all these species, the birds, the bees, the ants, all these things that we take for granted in our backyard and neighborhood parks, you'd be surprised we don't know as much detail about them as we think they do. So a really good place to start is observing and taking notes on what's happening with the communities of plants and animals. Observation is the foundation of the scientific method. And I really like to remind young people that science is accessible and giving them a way to get into science, particularly the type of science that I do, that doesn't require a lot of expensive equipment, that doesn't require, having to connect to big fancy pants universities. We can do a lot of groundbreaking research ourselves in our own backyards.
That's good. That's good. Sharif, you're up.
Cool. So professionally, as you said, I work in business intelligence and data analysis. So that's basically all those people in the background that are crunching through all the data in a organization, programming via different kinds of languages that are used to access kind of databases and data warehouses, and making custom reports basically. So anytime you've been at your job and said, hey, I need a report to show these two things and how they're are related, it's the people like me that are actually doing the technical work in the background. And as far as tips of getting into that, I would definitely say that probably the strongest the strongest thing that I think a lot of people overlook, specifically engineers that get into this, is they think it's all about the technical aspects of getting the work done, where I feel like a lot of the work is really the beginning, like really understanding what a business requirement is and being able to translate that into a technical specification to be able to do the work. Because a lot of times a person might make a business like request, and then the technical person just immediately just starts working without fully understanding it, spends all this time, and then delivers a solution that, you know, isn't really what the person wanted, right? Or doesn't keep up that communication with the person to see if the request has like changed in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of it is about like being like personable and like being able to like communicate with like people all through a different department within your organization that doesn't want to or doesn't care to understand sort of how it gets done, you know, but like you just have to make sure that you're comfortable being the conduit between like the business and the tech sides. And in terms of the personal stuff with the podcasting and the blogging and stuff, it's really just doing it, you know. And by that I mean getting started before you think that you're ready, because you'll never think that you're ready to go. So a lot of it is just getting that momentum, realizing that, you know, your stuff early on might not be as good as you want it to be, but there's very few things that you can learn without the experience of making mistakes, and that really goes for any kind of content creation, especially blogging and like podcasting. So my advice there is just to get started.
Yeah, I love that advice. In fact, I took it even before I knew what I was talking about. And in fact, I asked you particularly many questions about your mic. But so I thank you for that. Thank you both for telling us what you do and how you got there, and some tips for people wanting to start. It's really helpful. Sharif, you mentioned something that I actually want to use as a segue because I think it's really important. You mentioned being able to speak both the business language and the technical language, right? And how like you really need that skill. And in fact, that ability is how the three of us and many people that we know in our circles and many people we don't know use those kinds of cross-disciplinary skills. And in fact, we embody a space that requires the use of, you know, different skills, not just business and technical, but also social, you know, depending on where we're coming from, our family, where we're coming from, you know, where the place we're from, all of these things, this intersectionality matters. And so I think that underscoring the entire conversation we're going to have tonight is the ability to acknowledge and negotiate those different kinds of abilities and skills. So thank you for saying that. So without further ado, we'll transition into our main topic. And in order to do that, I actually want to take this moment to say, most people may have already realized this, but I just want to say publicly that today is actually the 2-year anniversary of Michael Brown's slaying. We didn't plan it that way to have this conversation, but it's a really important benchmark and moment in time to recognize that in many ways, while, you know, the extrajudicial killing of people of color is not new, certainly not just 2 years old, Black Lives Matter and movements like that really started to bubble up to the surface to a national conversation in the wake of some of the early killings like Michael Brown. So just want to honor his family, say his name, and acknowledge that we are also trying to continue that conversation in this particular space. So in talking about the specific nexus that we're trying to hit here, right? It's being people of color, men and women of color, Black men and women in particular on this call, in the world, given that we are just human beings walking through a space, but we're also STEM practitioners, right? Like we have STEM degrees, we're technical people. So we negotiate those two identities, and often, actually almost every day at every moment, they overlap. And so I wanted to start with you, Danielle, and your work, your recent article on Scientific American and on your blog, Urban Scientist, about being too traumatized to science. I have some quotes here, but maybe you could sort of encapsulate what you wrote there so we could use it as a touch point.
So much like okay. All right. Much like today, it was a moment of, acute pain that we were dealing with. And I was sitting at my desk and I just couldn't concentrate. So despite having so much to do, I recognized and I couldn't shake the fact that it was just so much pain and so much trauma and so much grief and mourning that it was hard to focus on, what I was supposed to be doing. And I just simply communicated that on my blog saying, these things are real to us. And by us, I mean, Black people in particular who have to move about in spaces still expecting to perform as if it's just another day. And that's painful enough, but then to walk around in places where everyone else is oblivious to us being in pain. So they see us, and then they don't acknowledge that we're in pain. And then they don't acknowledge these national issues. And for so many of them, they don't know. Like, it doesn't have the same touch point for them. They don't see this as a state of emergency. They don't see the personal risk and how it could have been them. So simultaneously, just feeling lost in a professional space that loves to brag about being so welcoming and inclusive and respectful of everyone and their experiences, and how daily you walk around feeling as if you can't be your whole self. And in that moment, it was acknowledging the fear and grief of being traumatized by today's events.
Yeah. Shree, did you want to, anything in there resonate with you that you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely the latter part of seeing everyone else kind of going about seemingly oblivious to what's going on. And I'd like to add to that is even if you share the workspace with people of like color, that doesn't automatically mean that you kind of have the sort of relationship that you can sort of rely on them to talk about this like kind of stuff. Because I think it's really like the workplace in general where, I know academia is slightly different, but in general, you don't touch upon, politics or race or religion or like those kind of things. So it makes it really tough. I mean, I had some really tough days, including some days that I had to take off. Where I just couldn't do it. I would just at my desk, I couldn't concentrate. And at the same time, I couldn't tell my boss what was going on, or I didn't feel like I could tell them what was going on. And that's specifically because of prior experiences that I can get to a little later in the show. But, like it's just hard to feel like the feeling that you have is not something that you feel like will be validated by the other people in your workspace. I've definitely felt that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And both of you raised really good points. It's interesting. I'm in DC today. We'll play Where's Jedidah at some point. I'm in DC today at the first NASA Mission STEM Summit, and the topic was diversity and inclusion. And I spoke on a panel, and one of the things that I mentioned was that in order to create a truly inclusive space, it's got to be relational, right? Like, you have to be able to have relationships with people that allow you to say, listen, I'm in pain right now and I need some space, or I'm in pain right now and I need to be at home. And that relationship has to be built before acute pain arises, yes. Right? I don't want to show up on the day that I'm literally aching and have to explain to you. And you mentioned that in your piece, Danielle, right? Like, when I'm in pain, I don't want to explain to you my pain. I just want you to understand that I'm in pain. So I wanted to point that out. And then the second thing was, there was this recent study done that talked about how if you're in a relationship with someone, it doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is, you just have to have some expectation of relation with someone else, and you're in pain and they don't acknowledge it, you tend to feel that as a betrayal, right? Like, it's not a passive thing. It's not like, oh, well, maybe they don't know. It's like, how can you see me in pain and not comment? And so both of you sort of spoke a little bit to this, right? I guess in a moment of levity, Evelyn from the internet, who is an incredible sort of social commentator and comedian, Black woman social commentator and comedian, created a video called Calling in Black, right? And it was because of this thing, right, that she sort of satirized it for us because she's gifted, but it's a true thing. Sharif, you said that you did not go to work, and
yes.
there are reasons for that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there are many days that I wanted to call in black, or I showed up, but technically I was calling in black because I wasn't getting enough done.
Yep.
Absolutely, absolutely, and then you find that your identities, your we'll say at least two identities, right? As a scientist, I'm gonna use that for shorthand. I know you're an engineer, Sharif. No disrespect, but
it's all STEM.
Exactly. We all family. Yeah. So then you have to contend with this identity of, okay, I need to produce a thing. I am here to do a job. There's work that I have to do here, but my spirit just can't. I'm not at the place where my spirit can do it. So now, we're talking about specific instances, but those things accumulate, right? They accumulate over time. So if I'm having that kind of reaction many days in a row, then I'm just not able to produce as much as my colleagues. And that's not because I lack the talent or the ability, but STEM is not a vacuum, right? Like, it does not exist outside of all the social ills. And when the social ills sort of directly impact us, then you're going to recoil.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as I said earlier, we started this conversation just talking about academic burnout, right? And then I was sort of reading through Dr. Shine Chang, who was our guest on that show, her notes on burnout and the sort of three main tenets of, like lack of interest in work, detachment from relationship, and there was a detachment from others, and there was one other which is slipping my mind at the moment. I was realizing we're all going through that same burnout as it relates to these subjects.
Yes, it does. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard to see, these photos and videos just being shared. With people with good hearts to share awareness of stuff, but it's harsh. I mean, it has an effect on me every time, and it does accumulate to the point where I don't even, like, if somebody asked me to list all the people that have been in these things, I wouldn't even be able to do it because there's so many, and these are just the people that we know about that that, like, actually there's video or something like that. I mean, it is absolutely burnout, without a doubt.
Yep, and it's interesting because one of the interventions that she suggested was twofold: taking time away, right, and getting proper mental health services. And so I really want to hear from both of you on those 2 points. But it's interesting because when you're talking about a societal burnout, then it's sort of hard to take time away. So what do y'all think about that?
It is. It's hard to do it. I was fortunate that life circumstances caused me to take time away. So, like, the combination of moving and going to a scientific conference where I was immersed in shop talk, which was the perfect mental vacation that I needed. It gave me time to focus on something that I enjoy and interact with people that I rarely see, to talk about subjects that I love, and so that was the perfect mental break that I needed from that. That was perfect. In mental health services, I stay on the couch all the time. I believe very much in mental health services, and having done it and then stopped doing it because of a series of moves, I realized I was missing it. So now I believe in maintaining a relationship with the counselors, so using those benefits. And it's not because, things are always bad, though I got to the point where I was pretty sure I needed medicine. I was like, I think I need medicine, and I went to see someone, and it turned out I didn't. I needed someone to kind of talk things out. But at least I recognized that I needed something, and I put those services in place. And for me, that's something I learned. I actually started counseling during my PhD, so during my dissertation. And one of the things I learned during my dissertation counseling that turned into personal counseling, it was about, you need to ask for help. Mm-hmm. Being a PhD doesn't actually mean you know a lot. It means you know how to find the answer. Right. And one of the things my counselor really helped me understand, that I can expand that beyond my discipline. And so I know how to find the answer. I knew something wasn't right, and I needed someone to help me find the answer. And so reaching out for help, whether it's a friend, whether it's, having help to do tasks, in this case, having someone to talk to see if, did I really need medicine or not. And come to find out, I didn't at that moment. But just knowing that there are solutions out there and finding those resources to at least get that action in place. And so I do it. I talk about it because I want to destigmatize it. I think it's important for folks to know that it's healthy and appropriate and not to be ashamed about. And that's why I talk about it freely with others.
Yeah. I think taking time off, I think is tough depending on your discipline. There's definitely some people where they might be contractor or pay by the hour. As like I am now, I'm on like a contract where if you're not in, you're not getting paid. So there's some people where they can't easily make that decision because they have to pay their bills, and they don't have vacation time or like a sick time. But if you do have the luxury to have those days, I would highly suggest to take advantage of them, because those benefits are as important as your salary. And if it comes down to it, there are other options like FMLA and like things like that, which can be applied, to mental health stuff if like you are like seeing a specialist in that field. So I definitely think that those are things that people don't take enough advantage of. And then I mean they can literally save your life and definitely save like your job. Um, and the mental health stuff, I think, definitely see a professional if you can, but also don't underestimate, as Danielle said, like the power of just talking to people that you really trust, like whether it's a partner or a family member or like a close friend. You'll also quickly find out who are the people that you can trust when you start bringing them real stuff. That's when you'll find out if like there's like somebody that kind of shies away from like being with you during the hard times. It can also have that effect of like saying, wow, I guess this person isn't really as down for me as I thought. Like I definitely found that out when like I went through like a really bad time a few years ago. Like I quickly found out who my real friends were when like it wasn't all fun and games. So yeah, it's an interesting situation, but there are things out there to help.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that. And I want to just go back and clarify the three things were emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and diminished personal accomplishment. And these are literally the things that we were just talking about. Also, thank you for highlighting, Sharif, the fact that taking time off is a privilege, and not everyone has it. Yeah. And Danielle, you're right about like destigmatizing the fact that anyone can use mental health services. They are amazing and awesome. So thank you for championing that. You bring up so many good points. I'm like, what do I want to talk about next? And I think since you've both sort of hit on this notion of support and having a community, a safe space, friends, or mental health services, someone to sort of talk to, work through it, I wanted to meld that with the conversation about technology, right? That, I'm pretty sure the three of us first met using Black and STEM, the hashtag Black and STEM on Twitter, which shout out to Dr. Stephanie Page, who created that incredible community. We would not know each other if it weren't for that. And it speaks to both the need and the desire for having those communities of people who understand similar situations that you've gone through, and also the really good use of technology. So I wanted to shout out, that we're doing this as a collabo with Black and STEM. But also, talk through this use of technology as a way to build spaces of support and build communities of support that you can go to and talk about these things. So do either of you have any thoughts about the impact of that, the power of that, or the importance of that kind of work?
Well, for me, it's been a lifesaver, and I've written about it a few times, how particularly as a Black woman in science, finding other Black women in science, because we're really scattered.
Yeah.
For the most part, there's not a critical mass of us in any one place or any one institution, and especially not in any single lab. And so if it wasn't for social media, being able to find other women, and then other Black women, and then later other women of color, so Latino women, Indigenous women, who I found we have very similar experiences and responses to these spaces. So being able to find my sister tribe, I mean, truly, of other folks going through it, offering support, offering mentorship, offering resources, and it's just been amazing. So there were a few times where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't think I should be here. And literally to have all these amazing, bright women swoop in and give you space to, go and have a cry and then deliver the tough love that you need to get up and do it again, because no one was willing to let you quit, because they knew you didn't really want that. You were just exhausted. And so then finding that support. And then what I found in many ways is that it became my refuge, using Twitter to communicate, to find other people and mentor, in this case now younger, scholars. That became a refuge, and it made doing it worth it, because now I recognize I wasn't just going through this BS, the macroaggressions, the microaggressions. It made it feel a little bit more worthwhile. I wasn't just bushwhacking in the field just for my own sake. I knew for sure there were people behind me. I knew there were people ahead of me that I was bushwhacking to get to. We were all converging on a very similar place, and I wanted to see their faces, at the end of that journey. And so that really became important for me. So these social media spaces have saved me emotionally, psychologically, and in many ways professionally.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like using it as a refuge, finding other people, as well as like finding like a younger folks to actually help with some of the things that I went through as well. I'd like to add, as a man, this actually helped me to see a lot of the privilege that I had, that I knew about, like sort of ideologically I knew, but just reading the stories that when women share stories about their experiences in STEM, it just kind of has that visceral effect that I don't think I had in the past. And I don't know if that's because the women that I knew didn't go to them, or because I never had a safe space enough for them to share that with me. But Twitter has really been a place that's really showed me, not only in STEM, but definitely but that's definitely included in the group, that women go through a very unique sense of like hardship and like challenges that I don't even have to even think about, so like that's really what the Black and STEM group and other groups in Twitter, and like I think it's like helped me to like to be a better man and to be a better person, to be aware of that.
Absolutely. And I asked a loaded question because Vanguard STEM is platformed on the notion of leveraging technology to build community. So I'm glad to hear you both agree. And I would underline the fact that having these relationships is important, because when I'm in a space where many people don't acknowledge, or I'm in an institution where my concern and my pain is not being acknowledged, I could go and pull up Twitter and see, oh, Sharif is talking about this, Danielle is talking about this, Stephanie is talking about this, the whole Black in STEM hashtag is talking about this, the whole Latinas in STEM hashtag. Like it created this instant space for me to grieve and process and hear someone else speak to the thing that I was feeling. And so getting back to where we're trying to contend with this racial trauma, I really feel like technology is important, not just in terms of rising these stories to the surface so that we hear about them and can create action and do things about them, but also in allowing us to contend with and process through all of the emotions that come with it. And so I totally agree with you. So I wanted to talk about how when these acute issues of police brutality or an extrajudicial killing or injury, how that impacts your desire to do STEM, not just on that day, right, but like generally. Like, do you feel like, sometimes I feel like, why am I doing astrophysics when I am dying on the street? Like my people, my family is dying on the street. Like, why do I do that? Do you get that? I don't even know what to call it. Do you feel that angst? We'll call it angst. When things like this happen, and if you do you mind talking about them? And just to our audience, thank you all for showing up and showing out. If you have questions, please, I see you commenting. If you have questions or things you want to talk about, please do let us know. I'll be pulling up some of your comments and questions as we go. But I'll throw the floor open to our lovely guest.
Yeah, I'll say absolutely. I mean, I definitely think about sometimes like about, what impact am I having, when there's, people, say, like you brought up like Michael Brown, at the beginning, like, when there were people getting tear gassed and rode up on by SWAT teams up in Ferguson, but at the same time, when I think about this like stuff, I think that everyone has their own way to be a change agent. I feel like, there are some people, their way to show their activism is to be in the streets, right? Like there's some people that that try the political arena, like they run for office and they try to change things. And one thing that I think that I do is, I try to set the best example of trying to be, an advocate for like diversity in my spaces and for quality in my spaces. And I think that that is still a like area that you can make change, and it ties in because like these people that are getting killed, like they're people with aspirations, like they're not just names, like they're people that like want to be athletes or scientists or dancers or anything, right? So like I think that it still serves for there to be good examples within all industries really, to give people that like hope to aspire to be in these places and to realize that they won't be the only one. So like I kind of tie in the work that I'm doing into into the same activity that like you might see in terms of like a formal sort of like in the streets kind of like a protest, because there's been a lot in like in like Milwaukee, because like we had like homeless man Dontre Hamilton that was killed. It's an unarmed guy that was sleeping in front of a Starbucks that was like killed. And a lot of the work that like I've done with the youth here, it might be just like a math and science kind of tutoring, but I'm also bringing in those like conversations as well. So I think that part of building a strong community, is like having like the activist side, the professional side, the political side, as well as strong people in these different industries to like serve as examples. So that's kind of how I connect it all.
Mm. Good.
Yeah, definitely. Whenever these things happen, I literally, especially the last one, which caused me to write the post, was I literally threw my hands up and I was like, why the F am I here? Like, this is stupid. I could die. What is the point of any of it? But what I'm reminded is that I believe it, and I know it to be true for me, that education, higher education in particular, is a valuable and viable route to mobility out of the circumstances that we tend to be victimized by. And advocating for access to kids like Michael Brown and the folks in his community, Trayvon Martin, Rakia Boyd, all these lives, Tamar Rice, whoever he was supposed to be, the fact that these kids deserve to live a full life, and kids like them need access to higher education to be whoever it is they're going to become. And if we are not there, so those of us who come from those same communities, who have a mind that they deserve to be there and willing to fight for their place there, to make sure they're educated and have opportunity, if academics like us aren't physically there, what's the chances of their success?
Right.
Right. And so not just to serve as a role model, but also to serve as mentors and advocates, as a part of those faculty and staff. And so that's what I'm reminded of.
Absolutely, absolutely. I really appreciate both of your comments, and I wrote down everyone has a way to be a change agent. I can see it's already taken off on Twitter, and it's so true. Figuring out a way to be in the space and do the things we do. And in fact, Natasha Berryman and I have been also writing some things on this topic on Vanguard STEM. And one of the things we talk about is like if you can. So the article in particular I'm talking about is some of us did not die, right? And if we're going to continue, then we have to do the thing that is in us to do because it's in us to do. And in doing that, we become revolutionaries, right? Because we're doing a thing that is really frowned upon. No one wants us to do this work. And I shouldn't say no one, but the system is not set up to support us doing this work.
Yes.
And that is that makes it revolutionary. So I really appreciate you both pointing that out and talking about how each one of those souls had a mission and a purpose on this planet that was cut short. So thank you both for mentioning that and talking about how you contend with having your work matter, because your work does matter, and it's important to do it. So thank you for that reminder. Wanted to ask you about, so one of the things that I said this morning was in talking about the differentiated experience of women of color, to your point, Sharif. There's been a study by Joan Williams at UC Hastings, and she basically looked at a group of 600 women, and she basically asked them about their experience. And for the women of color, that's Black women and Hispanic women and First Nation women who were in STEM, they had all been mistaken for the help at some point in their career, right? Like this is sort of like cliche information at this point. And none of the white women had ever had that encounter. And that's something that I've said a lot to a lot of different people, to talk about how women are not a monolith and that our experiences are differentiated based on our intersections. But just tonight, as I was thinking about this conversation, I wondered about, well, what happens when you're not mistaken for the help, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with people who do those services. I am not at all trying to say there's anything wrong with that. It's just not the place that I'm in this moment, and so I want to be recognized for where I am. But what happens when you're mistaken not just for the help, but for a threat, right? Like, how do you contend with going over the line, right? So when I walk out of my building, whether it was at Yale or at Vanderbilt or whatever, if I go far enough from the building, no one knows that I have a PhD in astrophysics and I study black holes. I'm just another black girl on the street, right? And so I'm wondering if you all have any thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, I can say that one thing that has angered me a lot, especially since Michael Brown, it definitely didn't start that, but is honestly my commute to and from work. I usually take the residential streets. It's about a 15-minute drive. I see a lot of cops when I'm driving to and from work. I see them pulling over people. I see that kind of stuff, and it gets me mad because I start to think about all these sad situations that have like happened, and it makes you think like should I stop and be recording this? Like, should I is this person's rights being violated? And I shouldn't have to think about that for the people that I'm paying, that my tax dollars are like going to, and I know plenty of like good cops. It's not an indictment on cops in general, but there is a system there that is definitely not being 100% accountable for these, murders of like unarmed people. So if I drive a couple blocks from my office, a block from my office, if I get pulled over or like something like that, like it's going to be no different from if I'm anywhere, like I don't walk around with my degree,
like Flavor Flav's clock, you don't want
yeah, that'd be a good idea though.
That actually would be a good idea.
Flavor Flav. I'm just saying.
I mean, and yeah, I've had times, unfortunately, where I've had like, cops pull weapons on me for no reason. I've been, I was just talking about it today, like I've been stopped and frisked in front of my own house in Philadelphia. And if the listeners aren't familiar with it, it was a policy, mostly in New York, but like also in Philly as well, where the police, would just stop and frisk you without any probable cause for anything, in like quote unquote target high areas of like crime. And, it's super embarrassing, and like I said, they just do it. They just profile people, and that kind of mentality, I feel like, is what leads to a lot of this, more like aggressive act, activities. Also, like the lack of like repercussion from the courts, maybe 99% of the time, right? So yeah, that like commute has been getting me really upset, as I'm driving and I'm witnessing, like I'm witnessing police doing their jobs, but I don't know if they really are.
Yeah. For me, it's not so much a threat. It comes up to the whole "you don't belong here" response. So I'm a field biologist. I work outside. I have to be outside to catch rodents. And other than when I'm in a developing nation where there tends to be mostly brown people. So here in the States, when I do my field work, I always get the cops called on me.
Wow.
Not breaking any laws. I have permissions to be on the land, but I get the cops called on me so often that they have to leave notes with dispatch to ignore the calls on me.
Wow.
That's how often. It's for no other reason than this package, this brown girl, in the case where I went with a graduate student training her, these two black women are in someone's farm fields. So, I mean, to use patriarchy to our advantage, you don't tend to think of women walking around in overalls as threatening in the middle of nowhere fields, but we were constantly, being surveilled. People would slow down and take our tag numbers, and then the police would show up. Or even if I'm, in the building, because I work with animals, we usually work in very secure parts of the building. And if someone doesn't know me, it was always, "Who are you? May I help you? Why are you parking in this lot? This lot is for XYZ faculty. Why are you here?" "Well, I'm XYZ faculty." And then it's like, "What do you mean you're XYZ? Like this idea that they can't comprehend that a person who looks like me can be doing this work. And I know good and well that folks come in and out of these fields. It's like that Funny or Die skit with Blair Underwood, the black hiker.
Yeah.
That's what it's like to be a black biologist all the time. So you're literally, not so much a threat, which that can happen too. I've heard that from male colleagues. But as a woman, it's mostly, just treated as if, "Why are you here? Please leave." Always getting the authority. So that interferes with my work. Like every time the cops show up to question me, I literally am being stopped from working, or in the case many times, I have an animal in hand. I can't stop what I'm doing for my own safety and the safety of that animal. And so here I am in no position to show my hands because I'm in the middle of trying to keep a weasel from biting me and giving me rabies, or I'm trying to tag an animal. And they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "You see very well what I'm doing. I have a rat in my hand." To get in a moment, get that light out of my face so that I can do my job. If you're going to shine that light, shine it here on this rat. Give me some extra illumination. Be helpful. But and these are things that when I talk to, white colleagues, they're like, "I don't understand." First they think it's funny, and I'm like, "I don't think you understand. That could have ended all bad for me. I'm in the middle of nowhere. You wouldn't have known anything happened to me." Or that's just with the cops. What if I come across some hunters who don't have very progressive views on people of color out in the wilderness? You may never hear from me again. So we live in a day, not just those of us on the street, but those of us who do work in, far out places in the middle of fields, where we have to check in with family and colleagues, much like our parents had to do back in the 50s in the South,
right,
to make sure we are still okay while we're doing our work. And so it's not just getting my data. I need to come back alive because I can't collect data if I'm dead.
Turns out that's difficult. Yeah. No, y'all are hitting on so many points and really important comments that I am overwhelmed. There are like 7 things boxed on my paper right now that I want to come back to. One of the main themes you talked about is microaggressions. We're going to come back to that because I have a question about that. If I don't, hold me to it, ask me to do it. But you said the fact that both of you have had run-ins with law enforcement while doing or going to your job is not at all surprising, but mind-boggling to me. Like I can't even, it is overwhelming and daunting in a way that I just can't even process. And you said, Danielle, sort of as a joke, if you get the light out my face, I can do my work. But it's sort of metaphorical. It's metaphorically true, right? If you could just please turn off that light, I could get my work done. Right. I really like that. Let me just interrupt real quick. We've got a couple of questions coming in from our audience. We'll start with the first one. How do you deal with the backlash and frowns from the academy or your workplace when you're vocal about issues as you STEM? This one comes from Natasha Berryman.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, honestly, it depends. To me, it depends on who's given the backlash. Because one thing I've learned is not to invest energy in people that just aren't invested in my success. So, and it gets a little complicated if that person, if that person has some control over your employment there or like something like that. But if it's just a colleague that I don't really care about, to be honest, I don't even invest the energy in it. So I might ignore them or just keep on with my points. If it is someone though that like a boss or like somebody that's in a position to really affect employment, in that case I've had times where I've brought it to HR, and I've had the fortunate the unfortunate time to be in like larger companies that have sort of an HR department to like deal with. It gets a little trickier if you're in like a smaller company or like a startup. In that case, I think you have to really evaluate, if that is a position that's really right for you, because I really feel like a job, because we spend so much of our waking hours working, that it really has to be compatible with you as a total person. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to go in and start playing hip hop and doing all that stuff, right? But it has to be conducive to you as a person. And, if it's something that's really affecting, personally held goals of like yours, then I think you do have to evaluate if that job is worth your like internal anguish.
Yeah. The best quote I heard from Dr. Rubidium, who is another amazing woman in STEM, is you shouldn't have to compromise your dignity just to do a job.
Yep.
And that's something to think about. Academia is a little bit more diffuse. We're not as linear as in business or even government. So you can have a lot of people influence your career that may not be directly, above you. And so you need to be careful with that. So I would give advice that I myself didn't follow. So let me just come with that warning. That as you're younger, the more junior you are, you can't afford to be as indignant, because you need to get some credentials under your belt. And I say that having not followed that advice. Mm-hmm. But I was in a very fortunate situation. My PhD advisor was an activist. And so I kind of was, academically bred in this idea of activism, scholar activism. So I knew I had someone powerful who had my back. So I didn't have to deal with that type of backlash during my graduate school years. But I started getting hints of it. And how you deal with it is how I dealt with it. One of the things I recommend people consider is that if you're going to do it, if you're going to be called out, you're going to be super scrutinized anyway, then control the terms of it. You control the terms of the messages. You control the terms of your visibility and what's said about you. And so I decided I was going to be the one who controlled the narrative of me, which is the reason why I started blogging, which is the reason why I'm very, very vocal on Twitter. If you got a beef with me, you got a beef with me forever, like Cardi B. Right? There's nothing like that. There was, because in academia, there's a lot of passive aggressiveness. You know, people play these microaggressions behind the scenes to try to exclude you from opportunities. And so my position has always been, you know, back to the light metaphor, I will shine a light on you. If you're going to dog me out, this will play out on stage for everyone. And what I found is that for most people, they will think twice about doing something too offensive because they recognize that everyone's watching. So I have this, I create this idea of everything at all times is vigilant. All of the academy is up for observation when it comes to me because I'm demystifying it. I made that my thing. I make it clear that that's what I'm doing. And I want to create these very free and welcoming spaces for everyone. And so I don't enjoy being the person who has to remind people how to be polite and have manners. But obviously, we need people not even out loud to say you're being rude, but just some people have a presence. You can walk with such a presence, and that is technically what senior faculty and administrators are supposed to do. Mm-hmm. They're supposed to have such a presence that everyone's on their best behavior. And what we've come to in many academic environments is we now have a culture that is so okay with microaggressions, so okay with inappropriate jokes, so okay with excusing why they can't find diversity because they don't want to compromise quality. They're okay with this false, you know, mutually exclusive idea that you need someone to step into the room and just to go, well, why is that? Say out loud why you don't want to do that. And I have found invariably they will hem-ha and recognize, now that, because they recognize, oh, I'm officially being called out. This is on the record now. I need to watch what I say. And you needed to watch what you say anyway, because this is a professional environment. Let's behave professionally.
Right.
And so so that's been my response to it. But that's why allies matter. That's why people in power who set good ethical standards, and that could be anybody. But we've kind of dropped the ball in so many of our institutions of having just people who believe in decency and fairness and taking care of business professionally.
Absolutely. So I will be the one in the room that points out that we are 2 minutes from where we're supposed to end, but we're having such a great conversation that if our panelists are okay with it, we'd like to keep going just for a little bit. And y'all sound off on social media if y'all are willing to stay and watch and continue with us. So do I have buy-in at least on the call? Are y'all all right with staying with us on the show?
Yeah. I can do a few more minutes. Yep.
Okay, we'll do a few more minutes.
Yep, I'm fine.
Perfect. Love the team. All right, so another question came in, and then I want to turn to the question of microaggressions. So the question on the floor from Stephanie Page is, what do you think causes Black men and women to overlook the symptoms of burnout, especially when it comes to racial trauma? And I wanted to jump in there, take a little moderator's license, and say that I think, first of all, part of it is understanding that burnout is a real thing, that it has symptoms, and that those symptoms can be identified and should be addressed. So I think one of the reasons why our last episode was so resonant with people is because Dr. Chang put language to something that we were feeling and didn't know how to describe. So I think to some extent, it's because burnout is not something that's really well understood in communities of color and Black communities and Hispanic communities and Latinx communities. So I think that part of it is just knowing what it is and knowing that it has a name and that it has been studied. But I think also, you know, there are these aversions to mental health and all the stigmas that go with that. So that's my 2 cents. I want to throw that in. I'll throw to Sharif first on this question.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of times that people ignore it is because you want to go hard and you want to prove people that you can do it. I mean, you want to prove to people that you can do it. I mean, you know, there's that old adage, you know, that Black people have to work twice as hard for half the credit, you know. So a lot of times there's a lot of pressure to not be the one that's complaining or be the one that, you know, can't stay up 10 hours to finish this report like everybody else is, you know, and that really leads, I think, to people ignoring mental health in general, like, you know, our community ignoring that in general. And that's why it's been such, I think, a struggle to validate it specifically with, like, you know, with older members of the generation that didn't really have that option and just worked until they got super high blood pressure and and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of like pressure, as a black person in a in a situation, and I would, I can't speak from experience obviously, but like I would argue probably even more as like a black woman in the situation, or like or like somewhere else on the gender spectrum. You always feel like that, like you have to do more than everyone else just to get the same kind of credit. So I think that's a big part of it.
I think we've also been socialized to accept being treated poorly. Like our socialization that things are just like this discomfort is normal for so many of us. I think that's the other reason we don't recognize burnout is because most of us were perhaps half burnt out to begin with. So it's a part of our normal. So not even recognize when it's really hit the line. There have been times like literally I went to the doctor, because of anxiety, and like, how you doing? I'm like, I'm under stress, but I'm always under stress. And I think that's part of it. We deal with this personally. Some of us in our communities, we're just so used to things being crappy sometimes that now it's our new normal, and that's the part I really like to fight against. I like to reclaim joy and comfort as normal. This idea that we don't always have to be struggling, this idea we have to be Superman or Superwomen, which is what Sharif, kind of hinted to. I'm all about being human, and being human means I need rest, I hurt, and when something's not okay, it's not okay. And so giving ourselves space to start calling stuff what it is. When something's not okay, go, that's not cool and that's not okay, that's not normal, and rejecting that. And I see so much of that, particularly in how I grew up. Folks being abused by the cops, being clapped up, or being treated poorly by a boss who at the last minute demanded they work late. And I'm like, that's not okay. Well, I did it because, I get you did it because you got bills to pay, but I need you to say out loud, this is not okay.
Right.
Because we begin to internalize and normalize and become desensitized to our own mistreatment.
Oh my goodness, you ain't saying nothing but a word. Oh my, nothing but a word. It's so true. It's so true that part of the healing, part of the resilience comes in recognizing what's normal and what's not. That is nothing but a word. All of the truth there. So with our last few minutes, I want to ask you a question that both of you were sort of excited about when we talked a little bit earlier. And this is the question of microaggressions. And you've both sort of spoken to this going forward. So, when we're dealing with racial trauma and these like acute instances of police brutality or other sort of, racially charged situations in society, they cause an immediate sort of, an acute pain that we feel, and it hurts, and we don't know what to do. But there's this ongoing, these ongoing little pinpricks and paper cuts that happen all the time. And so I'm wondering if maybe it ties into what we just said, Danielle, about, calling what's not normal, and also finding the space for self-care. I find that a lot of our main interventions are the same because you need to take care of yourself in order to deal with it. But I want to talk about how you stem in microaggressions, right? How do you recognize normal in a situation where your competence is always being questioned or your right to belong isn't always affirmed? Talk to me a little bit about that and how that plays in with, although is different from, the sort of acute, we'll call them macroaggressions for ease of comparison.
It's interesting. It was happening to me all the time. And again, I normalized it. I didn't realize it was a problem until actually my PhD, when my advisor, my activist advisor, who happens to be a Latino woman, she was the one who brought these things to my attention because I had normalized them. And so having someone to help me understand, to kind of midwife me through this experience and knowing how to draw the lines and draw the boundaries. And then working with, I was very fortunate where I did my PhD. We had a lot of strong women in our department. We had a lot of faculty, although not only a couple that were people of color, but they had a very inclusive, philosophy, and we had a lot of students from Latin America. So we were always consciously and cognizant of these issues and talking out loud about them. And so having these professors talk with us all about how to negotiate boundaries in our spaces and knowing our words. And so for me, that was part of my PhD education and learning how to do it. And so just speaking very, honestly saying, this bothers me, that I feel, comments, which don't always work, I'm sorry, in science, because people love to discount feelings, no matter, feelings are valid everywhere, but in the halls of academia, obviously. But just demonstrating patterns. And then for me, it meant standing firm and having the support of people. And then once I was on my own as a postdoc, then standing firm in those situations and just simply, being clear that, my no is a no. But it still digs me. It's still frustrating. I've mastered the art of I have no time for you face. I've mastered that art. And so whenever people start going down their roads, particularly with the whole questioning my credentials. So one of the things, and it's a minor thing, but it's still frustrating, to be introduced. So I'm being formally introduced as a postdoc. You have my business card. And you still ask me things like, what year am I in graduate school? Little things like that. So those are the types of things I get a lot. Or, like, well, who else does this? I'm like, I'm it. Yep, me. Or my favorite, and by my favorite, it's not my all. It's like, well, how do you get to do that? With that inflection on the you. And so one of the things I do now is I phrase the question as if I don't understand, and I force them to articulate what they mean.
Yeah.
And I watch them mentally try to backpedal, out of that, or for many, awaken to their biases that they had never been able to acknowledge. It's like, no, keep it up. No, keep saying it. No, because I don't know what you mean. Please explain.
Right.
Say it out loud. And so now my thing is, whenever I get into situations with people, I usually say, no. Speak plainly.
Yeah.
Speak plainly. Tell me exactly what you mean.
Break it for me so I can really understand.
Yeah. And so it forces them to either really own it. You either have to own it fully, and I'll respect you for it, or acknowledge you've been sitting around with all these latent biases, and then you need to go to the corner and deal with that. Because that was my gift to you. That was gift enough, helping you give birth to that acknowledgement. I'm not going to hold your hand through it. But it's a process, and this isn't a universal for you if you're particularly in a vulnerable situation professionally. What I would say to junior scholars or junior employees is that it's important that you earn a living. Like, I care that you are able to succeed. Yes, I want the workplace and these academic places to be more inclusive and safer. They're not going to happen overnight. So recognize that you're going to have to do some negotiating. And if you really have a passion for this work, then one of the most important activist things you can do is complete it.
Mm.
And so recognizing that. And so, but if it's too much, I respect your right to walk away and do something else. I do respect that. But if you really have a passion to be in STEM, and I can tell you from the other side, we want you here. You got those of us fighting to wedge a position for you. There's lots of different personality types out here, so everybody doesn't have to be a rah-rah like me. I know I have a bit of a reputation, and that's not everybody's ministry. We got a lot of amazing folks who I think it would surprise some people. I'm not going to say the names because I want them hip to my whole plan, but that some people who others regard as more respectable and able to interact with, you may be surprised how many of us all know each other, and we know each other's game plans, and we use these historical things to our benefit to get the conversation to move. And so know that if you're more reserved, that's okay too. That doesn't make you less committed. There's some people get in the door first, and then they make change from the inside. And some of us are busy beating the door down. But this is, make no mistake, we are strategically working to make these places better and safer and inclusive.
Yes. Somebody preach. Somebody did preach. No, absolutely. And I want to be mindful and respectful of your time. Thank you both. Sharif, did you have any comments you wanted to make before I close this out?
Kind of hard to follow that one up.
I know. I felt like she dropped the mic. And so
Yeah, that was completely intentional
yeah.
by Danielle there. No, I mean, I guess the only thing that I can say really is that I think microaggression ties very neatly into the other stuff that we talked about in terms of Twitter, in terms of finding like your refuge, and in terms of like really having a circle of partner, family, friends to really bounce this stuff off of. Because the thing is, like, the macro aggressions, they're huge, everyone realizes it. These micro aggressions, you might think you're crazy because
Yes.
they're all these little things that sort of like these little ticks, and it can literally drive you nuts,
Yeah.
where like you start to doubt yourself and you start to think that you're making excuses or like something like that. So I think that all those methods that we talked about over the last hour, those really help to deal with microaggressions and to realize that it's a systemic thing. It's not specific to you or to the work that you do or to the value that you bring to academic group or a corporate office or like whatever your journey is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's true. All of these things tie in. All of these things are things that we're facing on a daily basis, whether they're big, epic things or small pinpricks. And so you're right that a lot of the strategies that we're using we can use for both. So a question came in from Michelle Tong at Professor Tong about how, as a faculty member, she can help to reclaim joy. And Danielle, I think you spoke a lot to that already. So I'm going to sort of close with the notion that when you affirm the experiences and the humanity and the whole personhood of your students, then you help them reclaim your joy. When you connect them with the resources that they need, when you affirm their situations, when you acknowledge their pain, you help them reclaim their joy. So really it's about acknowledging their humanity, and that helps people recognize where their joy is and where their safe spaces are. I cannot thank you enough, Dr. Danielle Lee and Mr. Sharif Jackson, for being on this show tonight. You all helped us open the season 3 of Vanguard STEM with much grace and wisdom and just fervor that I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. So thank you both for being on the show, for sharing with us. We'll continue the conversation in social media, both on Twitter and on Facebook, all of the places. Please do join us for that. We want to keep this conversation going. We recognize that burnout is something that it's not going away. So we, as Danielle said, need to recognize and acknowledge it as not normal, but also make sure that we're constantly providing strategies and tools and outlets to help deal with it. So let me just thank a few people for making this happen, because it does not happen in a vacuum. First of all, it could not have happened without our panelists, so thank you both for being on the show. But I also, for this particular episode, want to thank JMA Solutions, in particular Nasa Eisler, who holds the wonderful distinction of being my favorite sister, and also for coordinating the space, and for Ronette Myers for allowing us access to the room, and to the IT team for making sure that we had a good connection. We literally could not have done this episode without you, so thank you for the use of your space and your kindness. A huge, huge thank you to the Vanguard STEM team. Y'all don't understand. When I say squad, I mean squad, okay? Lana Hunter, who's our operations manager, Natasha Berryman, who's our editor-in-chief and project manager, Christelle Frank, who does our social media and does a great job at it, Mallory Molina and Jasmine Johnson, who are our writers and content contributors for the website, and Miracle Rogers, who does talent coordinator. Our interns have been incredible this summer. They've provided momentum and excitement for Vanguard STEM. This is their last episode with us. Their summer internship ends on Friday, and we're really sad about that because they're our angels. But they have really helped us. This summer would not have been as productive or impactful without you. So thank you, squad. Y'all are my folks. Thank you also to Jazette Johnson, I'll hear about that tomorrow, for helping with our video editing, for Dr. Stephanie Page, for, as I said, the founder of the Black and STEM online community, for really unifying us all together, and also reaching out and suggesting this collaboration on the season premiere. We can't wait to see what else is going to come from that relationship. Thank you to the audience, to everyone that's watching, so for those of you who have retweeted, who have asked questions, who have hyped the show, in particular to the National Mission STEM folks today who made sure that people knew my show was coming on, from Ellen Stoffen to Christina Ritchie and a number of other champions at the summit. But again, to Danielle and Sharif and to NSF for giving us some funding to help support Vanguard STEM. Y'all are amazing. I appreciate you being here. It's been my pleasure and honor. And with that, we'll close out our season premiere of Vanguard STEM. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.